They called her Mara of the Twin Eyes, a name whispered in hushed tones when the fire burns low and the shadows grow long. It's a story you might have heard in fragments, a chilling local legend passed down through generations. But tonight, we're going to piece together the full, haunting tale of the woman with one eye of fire and one of ice. Mara wasn't always a specter of fear. Long ago, she was the heart of her village, a healer whose hands seemed to hold the very essence of life. In an age when plague swept across the land like a merciless tide, Mara was a beacon of hope. She would sit with the sick, her voice a soft, melodic hum, as she whispered ancient words of healing, words passed down from her grandmother and her grandmother before her. She didn't have potions or elixirs, only her knowledge of herbs and the profound power of her comforting presence. And for a time, it was enough. The fevers of children would break under her touch, the ragged breaths of elders would even out, and life, against all odds, would return to those on the brink of death. The villagers revered her. They brought her gifts of bread and wine, carvings of wood and woven cloths. They called her their miracle. But miracles, as they often do, attract unwanted attention. The world outside their small, isolated community was one of fear and suspicion. The church, powerful and unyielding, saw not miracles, but deviance. They heard tales of a woman who could command life and death with mere words, and saw not a healer but a witch. A delegation of stern-faced priests arrived one day, their black robes stark against the green of the valley. They didn't see the grateful faces of the survivors. They saw only a woman who defied their laws of God and nature. They spoke of heresy, of dark pacts and forbidden magic. The villagers who had once hailed Mara as a saint now shrank away, their gratitude replaced by a chilling primal fear. It's a terrible thing, how quickly love can curdle into terror when properly stirred. They cornered her in the village square, the very place where she had been celebrated. The accusations were swift, the trial a mockery of justice. Witchcraft, they cried. Her pleas of innocence were drowned out by the rising hysteria. She had only ever sought to help, to save, to heal, but her power was something they couldn't understand, and what people cannot understand, they often seek to destroy. They dragged her to a pyre built from the wood of the forest she knew so well. As the flames licked at her feet, a terrible transformation began. The pain, the betrayal, the sorrow. It all coalesced within her. Her gentle spirit, forged in compassion, was now being tempered in the fires of hate. They say that in her final moments, she did not scream. She simply looked out at the crowd, her eyes locking onto each face, the fearful, the hateful, and the few who wept in silence for the good woman they were too afraid to defend. And in that inferno, something broke. Or perhaps something was born. Her eyes, once a warm and gentle brown, began to change. One flared into a burning, furious red. The color of the flames consuming her, the color of her rage at the injustice. It held the memory of every soul she had fought for, every life she had saved. The other eye turned a glacial, piercing blue, the color of the deepest sorrow, the hue of an endless winter. It held the ghost of every soul she had lost, every person she couldn't save from the plague or from the fear of their neighbors. When the fire finally died down, there was nothing left but ash. The village felt a collective, hollow sigh of relief. The witch was gone. But they were wrong. She wasn't gone. She was just changed. Now she walks again. Not as Mara the healer, but as Mara of the Twin Eyes. She is a specter caught between worlds, an echo of a promise and a curse. She is drawn to places of deep sorrow and lingering regret. They say she doesn't seek vengeance on the descendants of those who wronged her. That would be too simple. Her curse is far more personal, far more intimate. Her presence is subtle at first. You might catch a flicker of movement at the edge of your vision, a cold spot in a warm room, the feeling of being watched when you are utterly alone. But her true calling card is the reflection. You'll be looking in a mirror, washing your face, combing your hair, and for a split second you'll see her. Not a full figure, just a flash of her eyes in the glass, looking back at you. One burning red, one freezing blue. It's a warning, a test. Most people dismiss it, a trick of the light, a tired mind playing games. They rationalize it, shake their heads and turn away. But they always blink. It's an involuntary reflex, a natural reaction to a startling sight. And that's all she needs. One single blink, because when you open your eyes again, she's no longer in the mirror. She's behind you. You won't see her face, not at first. You'll just feel it. An impossible cold will envelop you, the kind that seeps into your bones. The air will become heavy, thick with the scent of wood smoke and something ancient, like dried herbs and grave dust. And then you'll hear the whisper. It's not a human voice. It's the rustle of dead leaves, the creak of a dying tree. Her voice is the sound of sorrow itself. She'll whisper the name of someone you've lost, someone you miss with an ache that has never truly faded. She knows your deepest grief, the faces that haunt your quietest moments. If you turn around, you'll finally see her. A spectral figure shimmering at the edges, her form indistinct, but for those two impossible eyes. The red eye burns with a fierce protective light, reminding you of the love you still hold for those you've saved, the people you've helped. But the blue eye glows with a cold, bottomless despair, reflecting back at you every regret, every person you couldn't help, every goodbye you never got to say. She doesn't harm you. She doesn't touch you. She simply forces you to look, to confront the two halves of your own soul, the love and the loss, the triumphs and the failures. She holds up a mirror, not of glass, but of your own heart. And you are forced to gaze into it, to see the red of your own saved souls and the blue of your own lost ones. Some people scream, some collapse, but some, a very few, understand. They meet her gaze and they don't look away. They accept the fire and the ice within themselves, and to those few, Mara offers a moment of peace. The cold recedes, the whispering stops. She gives them a nod of ancient, weary understanding, and then fades away, leaving them alone, but somehow whole again. So the next time you look in a mirror and see a flicker of mismatched light, remember the story of Mara. Remember the healer who became a ghost. And if you see those twin eyes staring back at you, a warning and a lament all in one, try not to blink. In the remote, unforgiving heart of the Carpathian Mountains, nestled among jagged peaks and whispered legends, stands a forgotten convent. Its stone walls have weathered centuries of silence, but within them a story lives on, a story the sisters would only speak of in hushed, fearful tones. It is the tale of a nun who dared to defy God himself. Her name was Sister Adela. Unlike her devout sisters, Adela's faith was a restless, burning thing. She found the scriptures too narrow, the dogma too confining. She yearned for a truth that lay beyond the sacred texts, a divine knowledge that pulsed just outside the veil of their reality. Her prayers were not just pleas for salvation, they were demands for answers. She sought the kind of enlightenment that the Church had long forbidden, delving into ancient, esoteric rituals that blurred the line between the holy and the profane. Deep within her secluded cell, lit only by a single flickering candle, Sister Adela began her forbidden work. She would spend her nights poring over unsanctioned manuscripts, her lips moving to form words that had not been uttered within those hallowed walls for 1,000 years. She wasn't just praying, she was summoning. She called out to the forces that exist in the spaces between worlds, the entities that predate scripture and defy mortal understanding. She believed that true divinity was not something to be worshipped from afar, but a power to be grasped, to be understood, to be seen with one's own eyes. the other sisters grew wary. They noticed the change in Adela. A strange light seemed to emanate from beneath her locked door at night. Unfamiliar guttural chants would sometimes drift into the cloisters, silencing the crickets outside. They saw a feverish intensity in her eyes, a hunger that seemed to consume her from the inside out. They warned her, pleaded with her to return to the simple faith that had sustained them for generations. But Adela was already too far gone. She had tasted a different kind of knowledge, and she would not be turned back. One fateful night, the Mother Superior, driven by a growing sense of dread, gathered a few of the bravest nuns to confront Adela. They forced open the door to her cell and were met with a scene that would haunt their nightmares for the rest of their days. Adela was on her knees in the center of the room, surrounded by arcane symbols scrawled in chalk upon the cold stone floor. Her head was thrown back, her body convulsing as if caught in the grip of an invisible storm. But it was her face that made them gasp in terror. Her face had transformed. It was no longer the serene, familiar face of Sister Adela. It was a terrifying paradox, a canvas of divine conflict. Her left eye blazed with an impossible light, burning with the intensity of a miniature sun, radiating a heat that shimmered in the air. It was an eye that had seen the raw, untamed power of creation. Her right eye, in stark contrast, was as cold and lifeless as a frozen moon. It was a dark, vacant abyss that seemed to hold the chilling emptiness of the void. She had sought divine truth, and in finding it, her very being had been split in two. Horrified by what she had become, convinced she was possessed by a demonic force, the sisters subdued her. They saw her not as a seeker of truth, but as a vessel of blasphemy. They couldn't bring themselves to execute her in the traditional sense. She was still, in name, one of them. So they chose a different fate. In a secret, desperate ceremony, they buried Sister Adela alive, interring her in a bricked-up tomb beneath the chapel floor, hoping to seal away the unholy power she had unleashed. They prayed that the consecrated ground would contain her, that her story would fade into just another grim warning whispered among novices. But some things cannot be buried. Some legends refuse to die. Decades passed. The convent fell into disuse, its halls growing silent and cold. Yet the local villagers and the few brave pilgrims who dared to visit never forgot the story. They say that when the old church bells toll at the stroke of midnight, a sound can be heard from deep within the earth. It starts as a faint vibration, a tremor beneath the chapel floor, and then it rises, a soft, ethereal laughter echoing through the empty nave. A laughter that is both joyful and deeply, profoundly sorrowful. Those who have spent the night within the convent's walls tell even more chilling tales. They speak of a spectral figure gliding through the moonlit corridors, a nun whose face is half shadow, half light. They say they've seen her, the nun of the split light, her footsteps making no sound on the dusty flagstones. She walks the halls as if searching for something, her head bowed in contemplation. Sometimes they hear her voice, a ghostly whisper that curls around the stone pillars. She is praying, but the words are wrong. It is Latin, but spoken in reverse, a perversion of the sacred rites she once held dear. And when she appears to the living, her message is always the same. She draws close, the burning sun of her left eye illuminating their fear, the frozen moon of her right reflecting their mortality. Her voice is not a command, but a revelation, a quiet, devastating truth whispered into the soul. God closed his eyes, she says, her words echoing with the wisdom of the void. Now I open mine. Her story serves as a chilling testament to the dangers of seeking knowledge that humanity was never meant to possess. Was Sister Adela a heretic, a monster who consorted with darkness? Or was she a visionary, a martyr who sacrificed her humanity to gaze upon the unfiltered face of the divine? Perhaps she is both. A saint to some, a demon to others, forever trapped between the light she coveted and the darkness she found. Her presence lingers in the Carpathian Mountains, a ghost of split devotion, a chilling reminder that sometimes the most terrifying truths are the ones we find when we look where we are forbidden. Have you ever looked into a mirror and felt like something was looking back? Not just your own reflection, but something else? In the quiet, forgotten corners of the world, old whispers tell of the dangers of vanity, of gazing too long at your own image. They speak of Lyra, the mirror witch. In a village nestled between mist-shrouded hills, a chilling dare has been passed down through generations of children. It's a simple, terrifying game. You stand before a mirror, let the candlelight flicker across your face, and you whisper the words, "Lyra, Lyra, come and see." Most are too afraid, but the brave or the foolish who complete the chant, they are never the same again. It doesn't happen all at once. First, a subtle change. One of their eyes, once brown or green or gray, begins to bleed into a startling, unnatural shade of ruby red. The other shifts, fading into the cold, deep blue of a frozen lake. And then comes the smile. It starts small, but it stretches, growing wider and wider until it looks broken. A haunting grin that never quite reaches their now mismatched eyes. They've seen Lyra, and a piece of her is now inside them. But who is this spectral figure who lives within the glass? Lyra wasn't always a monster. Once, she was a woman renowned throughout the land for her breathtaking beauty. Her hair was like spun gold, her skin like porcelain, and her eyes held the warmth of a summer sky. She was admired, envied, and she adored the attention. Her most prized possession was an ornate, silver-framed mirror, a gift from a wealthy suitor. She would spend hours before it, tracing the lines of her perfect face, captivated by her own reflection. For Lyra, perfection was not just a goal, it was her entire identity. Her reflection was her truest companion. But time, as it does for all mortals, began its relentless march. The first sign was almost imperceptible, a tiny, faint line branching from the corner of her eye. She tried to ignore it, to rub it away, but it remained. Then another appeared. A single silver thread wove itself into her golden hair. Panic began to coil in her stomach. Each morning became a ritual of terror as she inspected her face in the mirror, searching for new imperfections. The reflection that had once brought her such joy now became her tormentor, cruelly showing her the slow, inevitable decay of her youth. Her obsession with beauty warped into a desperate fear of aging. She saw not a woman growing into a new stage of life, but a masterpiece being defaced. The world, which once seemed to worship her, now felt like it was mocking her with every passing day. Her desperation drove her to seek out forbidden knowledge. She pored over ancient, dust-choked tomes, learning of dark pacts and shadowy entities that lurk just beyond the veil of our world. She learned of a demon, a creature of vanity and despair, that could grant wishes for a terrible price. In a final, desperate act to preserve the one thing she valued, Lyra prepared a ritual. On a moonless night, she surrounded her beloved mirror with black candles, their flames barely cutting through the oppressive darkness. She drew a complex sigil on the floor with salt and her own blood, and began the incantation. She called out into the void, offering anything and everything in exchange for eternal beauty. She wanted to be frozen in time, a perfect, unchanging portrait. A presence answered her call. The air grew impossibly cold, and the candle flames danced violently. A voice, smooth as polished obsidian, yet sharp as shattered glass, echoed not in the room, but directly inside her mind. The demon had come. It saw the depth of her vanity, the sheer force of her obsession, and it smiled. It agreed to her terms. Her beauty would be preserved forever. She would never age another day. The lines on her face would vanish. Her hair would remain eternally golden. Lyra felt a wave of ecstatic relief wash over her, but as the demon's power surged through her, she felt something else. A tearing sensation, a violent rending not of her body, but of her very soul. The demon, in its cruel wisdom, had granted her wish with a terrible twist. It tore her soul in two. One half, the vain, beauty-obsessed part, was fused with her reflection, trapped forever within the silvered glass of her mirror. The other half, the human part, the part that could feel love and sorrow and warmth, was left to wither and fade into dust, a forgotten ghost. Lyra, the woman, was gone. In her place was Lyra, the entity, a being of pure, cold vanity, imprisoned in a world of reflections. Her wish was granted. Her reflection would be beautiful forever, but she would be her reflection. And so, she now lives inside mirrors, not just her own, but all mirrors. She is drawn to them like a moth to a flame, especially when someone stands before them, admiring their own image, just as she once did. If you gaze for too long, lost in your own reflection, you might give her an opening. You might see a flicker in the periphery, a shadow that moves when you don't. That is Lyra, watching, waiting. She is jealous of the living, of the faces that can still laugh and cry and change. She covets them. When she finds a vessel, a child chanting her name, or an adult lost in self-admiration, she reaches out from her glass prison. She doesn't steal their souls entirely, no. She just takes a piece. She steals a part of their face, their identity, twisting it to reflect her own brokenness, marking them with her signature red and blue eyes. In return, she leaves behind a sliver of her own cold, empty vanity. The children in the village know the legend is true. They see the marked ones with their wide, unsettling smiles, and they know Lyra has been there. They've learned to be careful around mirrors, to glance and turn away, never to stare. They know that sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and the lights are out, you can still hear a faint sound coming from the glass surfaces in your home. It's a soft, chilling sound. It is the sound of Lyra's laughter, echoing from her prison, a timeless reminder of the price she paid for perfection. She is always there, just on the other side of the glass, waiting for you to come and see. So the next time you catch your own eye in a mirror, be careful. Don't linger. Don't whisper her name. Because Lyra is always watching, beautiful and broken, forever seeking company in her lonely, reflective world. Have you ever heard the whispers about the pale woman? Every 100 years, they say, she walks among us. She looks like any other person, almost. But her smile is just a little too sharp, and her eyes are too alive, holding a depth that feels ancient and unsettling. The legends, passed down in hushed tones from one generation to the next, call her the Collector of Eyes. They say she offers a terrible bargain. To those whose sight is failing, who live in a world of shadows and blurs, she promises a miracle, perfect vision, the ability to see the world in all its vibrant, breathtaking detail once more. A gift that seems too good to be true, and it is. Because she doesn't ask for money or jewels in return. She trades for souls. She offers perfect sight, but in exchange, she takes something far greater, something intangible yet essential. Imagine the desperation, a life lived in darkness, suddenly illuminated by a promise. How many would refuse? But the price is steep. Her victims awaken the next morning not with renewed vision, but in absolute profound blindness. The world they so desperately wanted to see is gone forever. But that's not the end of their torment. It's just the beginning of a new, horrifying reality. In their dreams, they are no longer blind. In their dreams, they see. But they don't see through their own eyes. They see through hers. And what a terrifying vision it is. One eye sees a world of crimson, of passion, and rage, of sunsets that bleed across the sky like an open wound. The other eye sees a world of chilling blue, of cold, desolate nights, and the unforgiving ice of a forgotten sea. Red and blue, night and fire. They are trapped, forced to witness the world through the fractured, alien perception of the creature who stole their own. She doesn't do it out of simple malice. No, her motives are far more complex, more unnerving. She walks the earth collecting the very essence of what we take for granted every single day. She collects the beauty of a sunrise, the raw envy in a jealous glance, the pure, unfiltered light of a child's laughter. She gathers these moments, these emotions, these visual experiences, hoarding them like a dragon hoards gold. Each pair of eyes she takes adds to her vast, unseen collection, a library of human experience viewed through 1,000 different lives. Think about it. Every time you look at something beautiful, every time you feel a pang of jealousy or a moment of pure joy, your eyes are capturing more than just light. They're capturing a piece of your soul, and that's what she's after. She is the ultimate voyeur, experiencing humanity not by living but by seeing. There's a story, a chilling tale from about 2 centuries ago, of a painter. He was a master of his craft, renowned for his ability to capture the very soul of his subjects on canvas. One evening, he claimed to have met a mysterious woman, pale and captivating, with the most extraordinary eyes he had ever seen. He was obsessed, determined to capture her likeness, to immortalize her on his canvas. He locked himself in his studio, working feverishly through the night, driven by a creative fire he'd never known before. His apprentice found him the next morning. The studio was cold and silent. The large canvas, which should have held the masterpiece, was completely blank. Not a single brushstroke marred its surface, and the painter, he was sitting in his chair, facing the empty canvas, his eyes nothing more than hollow, vacant sockets. The life, the talent, the vision, all gone. All that remained was a single, desperate message, scratched crudely into the floorboards with a palette knife. It read, "She paints with what you see." He hadn't been painting her portrait. She had been painting with his, using his sight as her medium, his perception as her pigment. When she was finished, she simply took her tools back. This is her nature. She doesn't just take your eyes, she consumes your entire worldview. She plunders the gallery of your memories, leaving you with nothing but the echoing nightmare of her own alien vision. So what does she do with all this sight? What is the purpose of this century-spanning collection? Some believe she is trying to build a world of her own, a reality constructed entirely from stolen moments of beauty and sorrow. A patchwork world made of 1 billion different perspectives, all stitched together by her will. Others think she is a fallen deity, punished to forever witness the world, but never truly be a part of it, and so she steals the experience from others out of a deep, cosmic loneliness. She is a paradox, a being who craves the light, but dwells in the shadows, a collector of beauty who leaves only emptiness in her wake. She is the reason old stories warn you not to stare too long into the eyes of a stranger, just in case those eyes are not their own, just in case they belong to her and she's looking for a new addition to her collection. The next time you look at a beautiful sunset or into the eyes of someone you love, take a moment, truly appreciate it. Because for most of us, sight is a given. It's a constant, reliable sense, but for some it became a currency, a price they paid for a moment of hope, a deal made with a smiling pale woman who promised to show them the world, but neglected to mention it would be through her own terrible, beautiful eyes. Have you ever felt that spine-tingling chill when you hear a story so unsettling it feels like it could be real? Tonight, we're delving into a tale that blurs the line between history and horror, a story whispered among Egyptologists in hushed tones. This is the story of Daniel Price and the curse that sealed his fate. Our story begins in the Valley of the Kings, under the blistering Egyptian sun. The year is 1923, just a year after Howard Carter's legendary discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb. The world was gripped by Egyptomania. Treasures, legends, and whispers of ancient curses filled the newspapers. It was in this feverish atmosphere that a brilliant but reckless archaeologist named Daniel Price secured funding for his own expedition. Unlike his contemporaries who sought the grand tombs of pharaohs, Daniel was obsessed with a more obscure legend, the tomb of a high priest named Anheru, rumored to be the guardian of the heart. Local guides avoided the area Daniel had pinpointed, speaking of a place where the sand itself seemed to hold its breath, a place where the silence was heavier than stone. But Daniel, driven by a desire to carve his own name into the annals of history, dismissed their warnings as superstitious folklore. He believed Anheru's tomb held not just historical artifacts, but an amulet of immense power, a relic said to grant its possessor dominion over life and death. For weeks, Daniel and his small, weary team toiled under the oppressive heat. The desert was relentless. Sandstorms erased their progress, equipment failed mysteriously, and a sense of being watched settled over the camp. His team grew uneasy, their morale crumbling with each passing day. They spoke of shadowy figures seen at the edge of their vision, and faint whispers carried on the wind at night. Daniel, however, was a man possessed. He saw these hardships not as warnings, but as tests of his resolve. Finally, one sweltering afternoon, their shovels hit something solid. It wasn't the grand entrance of a pharaoh's tomb, but a simple sunken stone doorway, almost swallowed by the dunes. Carved above it was a single stark hieroglyph, a heart pierced by a feather. Daniel's own heart hammered in his chest. This was it, the entrance to the Guardian's resting place. Ignoring the fearful glances of his crew, Daniel was the first to descend into the darkness. The air inside was stale, thick with the dust of millennia. It was an unnerving silence, a stark contrast to the ever-present sigh of the desert wind above. The narrow passageway opened into a small antechamber. The walls were covered not with grand depictions of gods and pharaohs, but with unsettling warnings. Scene after scene showed grave robbers being devoured by monstrous creatures, their souls weighed and found wanting. The recurring message was clear, etched with chilling precision. Disturb not the guardian of the heart, for what is protected must remain. His team members hesitated at the entrance, their torchlight flickering nervously across the ominous murals. One of them, a young man named Karim, pleaded with Daniel. "Sir," he urged, his voice trembling, "this place is not for the living. The warnings are clear." Daniel merely scoffed. "Warnings are for the weak, Karim. This is history, waiting to be claimed." He saw only one thing, the sealed doorway at the far end of the chamber. It was his prize, his legacy. With a crowbar in hand, he approached the final barrier between him and immortality. The stone seal was ancient and heavy, but Daniel's ambition gave him unnatural strength. With a grating shriek of stone against stone, the seal cracked. A puff of foul-smelling air rushed out, extinguishing several of their torches and making the men gasp. When Daniel broke the final piece of the seal, the very air in the tomb seemed to crystallize, turning to thick, choking dust in his lungs. He stumbled back, coughing, his eyes watering. As the dust settled, the burial chamber was revealed. It was surprisingly modest. In the center stood a single, unadorned black sarcophagus. But what drew Daniel's eye, what made his breath catch and his greed surge, was the object resting upon it. A golden amulet fashioned in the shape of a scarab beetle, its surface inlaid with lapis lazuli. It pulsed with a faint internal light, seeming to beat in time with his own frantic heart. This was it, the heart amulet. He barely noticed the final warning carved into the sarcophagus lid, the same phrase from the antechamber, but this time etched with a desperate, frantic hand. "Disturb not the guardian of the heart." Greed had made him deaf to caution, blind to the malevolence that now saturated the air. Daniel stepped forward, his hand outstretched, his fingers trembling with anticipation. The world outside, his team, the warnings, they all faded away. There was only the amulet. The moment his fingertips brushed against the cool metal, a deep, resonant tremor shook the ground beneath them. Dust rained from the ceiling, and the remaining torches flickered wildly, casting dancing, monstrous shadows on the walls. A collective gasp came from the men at the doorway. From the deepest shadows of the chamber, a sound began, a dry, rasping hiss, like sand sliding over ancient papyrus. The lid of the black sarcophagus slowly, impossibly began to shift. It slid aside with a groan of protest, revealing the darkness within. A bandaged hand, brittle and yellowed with age, gripped the edge of the stone coffin. Then another, with a series of sickening cracks and snaps of ancient bone, the mummy pulled itself upright. It wasn't the slow, shambling creature of fiction. This being moved with an unnerving, deliberate purpose. Its linen wrappings, which should have been pristine, were dark and stained, and they seemed to writhe as if alive, unraveling with that same sinister hiss. Then it turned its head. 2 points of light ignited in the hollows of its skull, burning like twin suns, embers of an ancient, undying rage. Those eyes, devoid of life but filled with terrible intelligence, locked onto Daniel. It wasn't just a look, it was an invasion. He felt a psychic pressure, a cold probe that seemed to touch his very soul, weighing it, judging it, and finding it utterly wanting. The amulet on the sarcophagus pulsed brighter, and the mummy took a step forward. Panic, cold and absolute, finally broke through Daniel's avarice. He screamed, a raw, primal sound that echoed horribly in the confined space. He turned and ran. He scrambled back through the antechamber, shoving past his terrified crew who were already fleeing for the surface. He didn't look back. He just ran, his heart hammering against his ribs, the mummy's burning gaze seared into his mind. He sprinted down the corridor, leading to the entrance, the blessed square of daylight his only goal. But something was wrong. The corridor seemed longer than he remembered. The walls, which should have been familiar, now seemed to twist and contort in the faint light of his dropped flashlight. He ran and ran, his lungs burning, until he burst through a doorway and found himself back in the burial chamber. The sarcophagus stood open. The amulet pulsed on its lid, and the mummy was waiting, standing perfectly still in the center of the room. Confusion warred with terror in Daniel's mind. It was impossible. He had run in the opposite direction. He turned and fled again, choosing another passage, then another. But every corridor, every staircase, every turn looped him back to the same dreadful chamber. The tomb was a maze, a non-Euclidean nightmare from which there was no escape. The architecture itself seemed to be alive, rewriting its own layout to keep him trapped with its eternal guardian. His flashlight began to flicker, its beam weakening, plunging him into longer and longer intervals of terrifying darkness. In one of those flickering moments, he saw the creature was closer. It hadn't moved, yet it was nearer, as if it was traversing space without crossing it. The hissing grew louder, filling his head. In the next flash of light, it was closer still. He could see the intricate patterns on its ancient bandages, could smell the cloying scent of natron and decay. Daniel was backed against a wall, his legs refusing to move. He was hyperventilating, his mind splintering under the impossible reality of his situation. The flashlight flickered one last time, illuminating the mummy's hand, fingers outstretched, reaching for him. The hand wasn't reaching for his throat, but for his chest, for his heart. As the light died completely, plunging him into absolute blackness, a whisper echoed not in the chamber, but directly inside his mind. It was a voice, ancient and dry as dust, speaking a language he shouldn't have understood, yet the meaning was terrifyingly clear. The heart must remain mine. The screams from the tomb abruptly stopped. When the remaining members of his team, spurred by a desperate courage, ventured back to the entrance, they found nothing. The passageway had vanished. Before them was only a solid wall of rock and sand, as if the tomb had never existed. Daniel Price was never seen again, another name lost to the desert. But some say, on the quietest nights, when the moon is high over the Valley of the Kings, you can sometimes hear a faint, frantic heartbeat under the sand, a heart that continues to beat in the darkness forever, guarding the Guardian. In the echoing, dust-filled basement of the Cairo Museum, something new and unsettling had arrived. It was a mummy, perfectly preserved, but with a feature that defied all logic. Its eyes, deep within the desiccated sockets, glowed with a faint amber light. Experts, baffled and a little unnerved, dismissed it as a trick of reflection, a strange play of light on ancient resin. But the museum's night guards knew better. They spoke in hushed whispers of footsteps echoing from the exhibit hall when no one was there, of faint, guttural chanting that seemed to rise from the very stones of the building. Then, one of them, a veteran guard named Omar, vanished. His shift ended, but he never clocked out. For 3 agonizing days they searched. They found him in a forgotten storage closet, his face a mask of frozen terror. His uniform was undisturbed, but his chest had been brutally torn open. His heart was gone. The official report cited a wild animal that had somehow found its way inside, a desperate attempt to quell the rising panic. The museum director, a man of science and logic, publicly dismissed the guard's stories as mass hysteria, a product of overactive imaginations fueled by ancient superstitions. He insisted everything was under control. His confidence shattered the very next night. A sound like a thunderclap ripped through the museum's hallowed quiet. The security team rushed to the mummy's exhibit to find the reinforced glass case, designed to withstand a sledgehammer, exploded into 1,000,000 glittering shards. The mummy lay undisturbed, its amber eyes seeming to burn brighter in the sudden chaos. But it was the wall behind it that drew their horrified gazes. The ancient hieroglyphs, painstakingly documented and translated, had changed. Overnight, the sacred texts had rearranged themselves, twisting into a new, terrifying message that even the most junior curator could understand. It read, "Anubis reclaims his servant." The director, now pale and trembling, ordered an immediate lockdown. No one in, no one out. He gathered every available staff member, from esteemed Egyptologists to nervous janitors, determined to solve this impossible riddle before the sun rose. They worked through the night under the cold, flickering emergency lights, their rational minds warring with the primal fear that gripped them. They measured, they photographed, they debated, all while the mummy watched with its glowing, lifeless eyes. As the first hint of dawn painted the Cairo sky, a strange, heavy silence fell over the museum. The frantic energy of the night before had evaporated, replaced by an unnerving stillness. The morning security shift arrived to find the main doors unlocked and swinging gently in the breeze. Inside, the museum was empty, eerily, impossibly empty. Every single person who'd been locked inside, the director, the scholars, the guards, the staff, had vanished without a trace. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken windows, no forced locks. It was as if they had all simply dissolved into the air, but they had left something behind. On the stone wall next to the shattered display case, burned deep into the ancient masonry, was a single, terrifying mark. It was a handprint, scorched black, its form unmistakable to anyone who knew the old gods. It was the slender, elegant, yet powerful hand of a jackal, the Hand of Anubis himself. The museum stood silent, a tomb once more, holding its dark secret. The servant had been reclaimed, and the god had left his calling card. The world would speculate, investigate, and theorize, but the truth was now part of the museum's eternal quiet, a chilling testament to the fact that some legends refuse to stay buried. They say some souls are too stubborn to die, others too proud. For Khepren, the high priest of a forgotten dynasty, it was both. In life, he was a man who looked gods in the eye and saw only rivals. He commanded powers that made kings tremble and whispered secrets to the very fabric of the cosmos. But even a man like Khepren could not outrun time, or so everyone thought. As his mortal body withered, Khepren performed his final, most audacious act of defiance. He refused the judgment of the afterlife. Through forbidden rituals and blood magic, he tore his own soul from the cycle of death and rebirth, binding it not to a mortal shell, but to something eternal, pure, gleaming gold. He didn't just mummify his body, he gilded his very essence, sealing his soul within the golden sarcophagus, the death mask, and the sacred relics that filled his tomb. He believed he had cheated death, achieving a form of immortality no god could grant or take away. His tomb was sealed, not as a final resting place, but as a throne room for his eternal vigil. For 3,000 years, he waited. Silence was his kingdom, darkness his subject. The world outside changed. Empires rose and fell like the desert dunes. Languages were born and forgotten, and the gods he defied became mere footnotes in history. Yet Khepren remained, his consciousness a cold, patient spark trapped within the gold. He wasn't alive, but he was far from dead. He was waiting. And one day, the silence was broken. The sound of grinding stone echoed through the burial chamber, a vulgar intrusion after millennia of peace. Light, harsh and unwelcome, pierced the darkness. And then came the laughter. It was the sound of greed, of profane men who saw not a sacred tomb, but a payday. A team of treasure hunters, led by a ruthless man named Malik, had found the lost sepulchre. They were hardened men, their hands stained with the dust of a dozen looted sites, their hearts empty of reverence. They saw the golden artifacts, and their eyes widened with avarice. They marveled at the craftsmanship, not for its beauty, but for its weight in the black market. "Look at this," one of them, a young man named Tariq, exclaimed, holding up a golden canopic jar. "This alone will set us up for life." Malik just grunted, his gaze fixed on the magnificent golden sarcophagus. He didn't care for the history, he cared for the prize. With crowbars and brute force, they desecrated the tomb. They ripped the golden mask from the mummy's face, its serene, eternal gaze now just a hollow shell. They stuffed the sacred amulets and statuettes into their dusty sacks, their laughter echoing off the hieroglyphs that told the tale of Khepren's defiance. They didn't read the warnings carved into the walls, curses that promised a fate worse than death for any who disturbed the priest's slumber. To them, they were just decorations. As they packed the last of the gold, a chill, unnatural and ancient, crept into the tomb. The flame of their torches flickered, casting long, dancing shadows. Tariq shivered. "Did you feel that?" he whispered. Malik scoffed. "It's just the desert wind, kid. Let's get out of this dustbin." They left, their bags heavy with gold, leaving the desecrated mummy of Khepren exposed to the air for the first time in 3 millennia. But as the treasure hunters left, something stirred. A single finger on the mummy's hand twitched. The dry, brittle wrappings rustled, not from a draught, but from within. The soul of Khepren, torn from its golden anchors, was now a free, raging entity. And it was hungry. It didn't hunger for food or water. It hungered for life, for warmth, for the souls of those who had wronged him. Back at their camp, the men celebrated their find, drinking and boasting of their riches. But their victory was short-lived. The first to vanish was Tariq. He went to fetch more water from the well and simply never returned. The others found only his footprints, leading out into the open desert before abruptly stopping, as if he'd been plucked from the earth. Panic began to set in. The next night, another man, Omar, was on watch. He saw a figure in the distance, silhouetted against the moon. It seemed to shimmer, wrapped in what looked like tattered cloth. It moved slowly, unnaturally against the blowing sand. As it got closer, Omar saw its eyes, 2 points of fiery, malevolent light. He screamed, a sound that was cut off with a sickening crunch. His companions found his post empty, with only a few scraps of bloodied cloth left behind. Whispers started among the local villagers. They spoke of an ancient curse, of a walking mummy, the Anku of the desert, who claimed the souls of the greedy. They called him the Lost Soul, a being that belonged neither to the living nor the dead. They described a figure wrapped in bandages, walking silently against the wind, its eyes burning with an unholy fire, forever searching. One by one, the treasure hunters were picked off. Each disappearance was more terrifying than the last. They became paranoid, turning on each other, their greed replaced by a primal fear. But as his crew dwindled to just him, even his resolve began to crack. He was haunted by the faces of his missing men, their screams echoing in his dreams. Finally, Malik decided to flee. He packed a bag with the most valuable of the golden artifacts and made for the nearest city, driving his jeep madly through the dunes. He drove all night, pushing the vehicle to its limit, convinced he could outrun a ghost story. But as the sun began to rise, his engine sputtered and died. He was stranded miles from anywhere, the silent desert stretching in every direction. It was then that he saw it. The figure shimmering in the heat haze, walking slowly, deliberately towards him. It was Khepren. The ancient wrappings that covered his body were no longer just linen. Stitched into the fabric, their faces twisted in eternal horror, were the preserved faces of his fallen companions. Tariq, Omar, all of them, their eyes wide and staring, their mouths locked in silent screams. They were now part of the mummy, their souls bound to his eternal torment. Malik fumbled for his pistol, his hands shaking. He fired shot after shot, the bullets tearing through the ancient wrappings, but doing nothing to slow the creature's advance. The mummy didn't even flinch. It just kept coming, its burning eyes fixed on him. It stopped just feet away, the air growing impossibly cold. The stench of the tomb of dust and decay 3,000 years old filled Malik's lungs. The undead priest raised a withered, bandaged hand. A dry, rasping voice, like sand grinding against stone, issued from behind the wrappings. It was a voice that hadn't been used for millennia, a voice that carried the weight of eternity. "You sought my gold," it rasped, the words more felt than heard. "You disturbed my peace, now you too shall never rest." The mummified hand shot out, grabbing Malik by the throat. His scream was a thin, reedy thing, swallowed instantly by the vast, unforgiving silence of the desert. The sun rose higher, baking the empty jeep and the lone set of tracks leading into the endless dunes. There was no sign of Malik. Out in the vast expanse, a bandaged figure continued its slow, ceaseless walk. A new, terrified face now stitched into its wrappings, its eyes staring blankly at the horizon. Khepren, the lost soul, continued his eternal patrol, a walking tomb for the thieves who dared to steal from him, forever bound to the desert, forever hungry. They say, if you're ever lost in that desert at night and you see a lone figure walking against the wind, don't call out, don't approach, just turn and run. For Khepren still walks, and he is always looking for new souls to add to his collection. Start with slow, atmospheric, slightly ominous music. Have you ever wondered what secrets lie buried beneath the shifting sands of Egypt? We all know the stories of Tutankhamun, of Ramses the Great, of Cleopatra. Their legends are carved in stone and written on papyrus, tales of power, love, and betrayal. But what about the stories that were never meant to be told? the ones sealed away in darkness, waiting for the right moment to break free. Tonight, we delve into one such tale, a legend whispered by desert travelers on moonless nights. A story of a king so feared, his very name was erased from history. This is the story of the Undying King and his awakening. Our story begins near the ancient city of Luxor, a place steeped in mystery and divine history. For millennia, the desert has guarded its secrets well. Tombs of pharaohs, queens, and nobles lie hidden, their treasures and curses sleeping peacefully. But one night, that peace was shattered. It was a night unlike any other, a night when the cosmos itself seemed to hold its breath. A total lunar eclipse was underway, painting the moon a deep, blood-red hue. The ancient Egyptians called this a bad omen, a sign that the cosmic order, the Ma'at, was disturbed. They had no idea how right they would be. As the crimson moon reached its zenith, casting an eerie glow over the desolate landscape, the ground began to tremble. It wasn't an earthquake, not in the way we understand them. This was something different, something localized, as if the very earth was groaning in pain, trying to give birth to something terrible. Near a cluster of forgotten ruins, the sand started to churn and swirl, rising like a furious wave. And then, with a deafening crack that echoed across the dunes, the ground burst open. An ancient, unmarked tomb, buried for thousands of years, had been breached from the inside. A storm of sand and dust, thick with the scent of decay and ancient spices, erupted from the chasm. It blotted out the stars, choking the air with a palpable sense of dread. The few Bedouin travelers who were unfortunate enough to be crossing the desert that night froze in terror. They spoke later of a silhouette, a figure of impossible height and regal bearing, slowly, deliberately rising from the ruined tomb. It moved with the stiffness of ages, yet with an undeniable sense of purpose, of power reawakened. As the dust began to settle, the figure became clearer. It was a mummy, but not like the ones you see in museums, wrapped tightly and resting peacefully in a sarcophagus. This being was animate, its burial wrappings tattered and torn, hanging from its desiccated frame like ancient banners. Its eyes, they were the most terrifying part. They weren't empty sockets. They glowed with an intense, malevolent light, like two burning coals, twin torches of hatred that pierced the darkness and lit the desert for miles around. One hand, wrapped in decaying linen, stretched out towards the heavens, its fingers curling and uncurling, as if grasping for a long-lost scepter, as if trying to reclaim the world that had forgotten him. The travelers who witnessed this spectacle fled, their hearts pounding with a primal fear they had never known. They didn't need to be told what they had seen. They had witnessed the return of a nightmare. But who was this phantom pharaoh? Why was his tomb unmarked? The answers lie in the fragmented legends that survived, passed down in hushed tones from generation to generation. They say he was a king from a forgotten dynasty, a ruler whose ambition was as vast as the Sahara itself. He was a brilliant military strategist and a master of forbidden arts, communing with deities and entities that others dared not name. He believed he was destined not just to rule Egypt, but the entire world, and not just in his lifetime, but for all eternity. His power and arrogance grew unchecked, and so did the fear among his own people, even his own family. His brother, the high priest, and his own council saw the darkness growing in his heart. They believed he was becoming a threat to Ma'at, the divine balance of the universe. So they hatched a desperate, treacherous plan. They couldn't kill him. His knowledge of dark magic had made him almost impossible to destroy, but they could contain him. During a grand festival, they ambushed him. Using sacred relics and powerful incantations, they subdued him. But instead of a noble burial, they subjected him to the most horrific fate an ancient Egyptian could imagine. They mummified him alive, While he was still conscious, they bound him in linen, performed the rites of the dead, and placed a powerful curse upon his tongue. As they sealed him in an unmarked sarcophagus, deep within a tomb with no name, his final muffled words were a prophecy of vengeance. When the sky bleeds and the moon turns to blood, the desert will release me. I shall rise, and the world will remember the meaning of fear. They buried him alive, hoping the sands of time would erase his memory forever. They struck his name from every monument, every papyrus scroll. They tried to make it so he never existed. For 3,000 years their plan worked. For 3,000 years he slept, trapped in an unending nightmare, his rage and hatred festering in the silent dark. But a curse spoken with such venom, by a will so powerful, does not simply fade away. It waits. It waits for the stars to align. And on that night of the lunar eclipse, the conditions of the curse were met. The moon bled crimson. The ancient magic that held him prisoner finally weakened, shattered by his relentless will. The prophecy was fulfilled. Somewhere in the vast, silent desert, under the gaze of a blood-red moon, ancient footsteps echoed once more. The Undying King was free. His first steps on the sand were not those of a shambling corpse, but of a monarch returning to his kingdom. And his first thought was not of treasure or of glory, but of revenge. The world had forgotten him, but it was about to get a terrifying reminder. His kingdom was now the entire world, and his reign of darkness was just beginning. What happens when a being of such ancient power and malice is unleashed upon our modern world? A world of technology, of science, of skepticism. Can our modern armies stand against a king who commands the very sands and whispers to the shadows? The legends are silent on this. They only tell of his awakening. The rest of the story is yet to be written. They say death always comes without warning, a silent thief in the night. But tonight, he knocked. A firm, deliberate rap on the door that seemed to shake the very foundations of Eleanor's small apartment. It was late, well past midnight, and the city outside was a sleeping giant. Who could possibly be calling at this hour? She hesitated, her heart thumping a nervous rhythm against her ribs. Peeking through the peephole, she saw nothing but an inky blackness, a void where a person should be. Against her better judgment, she unlatched the deadbolt and opened the door a crack. There he was, a figure cloaked in shadows so deep they seemed to swallow the dim light from her hallway. The hood of his cloak was pulled low, concealing his face, but it didn't matter. Eleanor knew. You just know when you're standing in the presence of an ending. A skeletal hand, elegant in its starkness, emerged from the folds of his cloak. It wasn't menacing, not like she'd always imagined. It was steady, almost gentle, and clutched between those bone-white fingers was a single crimson rose. "For you," he rasped. The voice was like gravel and starlight, ancient and final. It wasn't loud, but it filled every corner of her mind. Eleanor wanted to scream. She wanted to slam the door, lock it, and pretend this was all just a terrible waking nightmare. But the rose, something about the flower, silenced her. Its petals weren't just red. They were the color of a fresh wound, the shade of a vibrant sunset, the hue of life itself. And as she stared, she could have sworn she saw them pulse, a slow, steady beat like a distant heart. The fear that had frozen her in place began to thaw, replaced by a strange, profound curiosity. She looked from the impossible flower back to the hooded figure. Her voice, when she finally found it, was barely a whisper. "Why? Why me?" The Reaper tilted his head, a gesture that should have been human but felt utterly alien. From the depths of his hood, 2 points of light ignited, burning like dying suns in the vast emptiness of space. His hollow eyes seemed to see not just her, but every moment of her life, every joy, every sorrow, every quiet prayer she had ever uttered. "Because you prayed for one more day," he said, his voice softer now, almost sympathetic. And she remembered. Just last night, huddled under her blankets, feeling the weight of her illness, she had whispered into the darkness, "Please, just one more day, one more sunrise." He had heard. The universe had heard. The Reaper extended his hand a little further, the rose a silent offering between them. Her hand trembled as she reached out, her fingers brushing against his cold, smooth bones. The moment her skin touched the stem of the rose, the world fell silent. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall stopped. The distant hum of the city ceased. Outside her window, a bird mid-flight hung suspended in the air. Time itself had surrendered. The scent of the rose filled her senses, intoxicating and overwhelming. It smelled of rich soil, of summer rain, and of something ancient and eternal. It was the scent of a memory she hadn't made yet. As she took the flower, her legs gave way. The world didn't go dark. Instead, it dissolved into a kaleidoscope of colors, swirling around her like a gentle whirlwind, all centered on the crimson rose in her hand. Her last breath wasn't a gasp of pain or fear. It was a soft sigh of release, and as it left her, it carried the scent of the flower, sweet and endless. She had asked for one more day, and death, in his infinite, strange mercy, had given her an eternity instead, captured within the petals of a single rose. Her time on earth was over, but as she fell, she realized this wasn't an ending. It was a transformation. She was becoming part of that scent, part of that color, part of that eternal, beautiful finality. They say death is a thief, but sometimes he is a giver. He takes a life, but he leaves a story. Eleanor's story didn't end with a closing door and a final breath. It began with the knock of a visitor and the gift of a flower, a reminder that even in our final moments, there can be a strange and unexpected beauty. That even the Reaper can appreciate the profound elegance of a rose. Her one more day had become forever. Have you ever heard the whispers of the Red Bloom Pact? It's a tale that sends a shiver down your spine, born from a village so forgotten even maps had given up on it. There, the people didn't fear ghosts or goblins, they feared the night of the blood moon. Because with every crimson moonrise, a silent hooded figure would drift through their cobblestone streets. This being, whom they called the Reaper of the Bloom, wasn't a harbinger of indiscriminate doom. No, its purpose was strangely specific. It would move through the anxious crowd, its face hidden in shadow, extending a single perfect red rose. To be chosen was a death sentence. The one who accepted the rose, whether by choice or by a trembling forced hand, would vanish by dawn. No screams, no struggle, just an empty bed and a lingering scent of petals. For generations, the village lived under this grim lottery. They tried everything, barricading doors, performing ancient rituals, even attempting to flee. But the Reaper always found its chosen one. The village grew smaller, its heart heavy with a sorrow that never faded. One year, the blood moon cast its eerie glow upon the village square, and the hooded figure emerged from the mists, as it always did. The air was thick with dread. The Reaper glided past elders, past children, its gaze unseen but deeply felt. And then, it stopped. It stopped right in front of Ilara, the youngest sister of a brave woman named Mara. Ilara's eyes, wide with terror, met the empty space within the hood. A pale, skeletal hand extended the rose. Mara watched, her heart turning to ice. Her little sister, the light of her life, was being offered the bloom of despair. Without a thought, Mara lunged forward, trying to stand between Ilara and the Reaper, but it was like pushing against the wind. Ilara's small hand, shaking uncontrollably, took the flower. A collective gasp echoed through the square, and then silence. The Reaper simply turned and dissolved back into the mist, its duty done. That night, Mara didn't sleep. She sat by Ilara's bedside holding her sister's hand, watching the rose on the nightstand glow with a faint, sinister light. She pleaded, she prayed, she cursed the heavens. But as the first rays of dawn pierced the window, Ilara's form flickered, became translucent, and then she was gone. Only the rose remained, its petals now a shade deeper, as if stained by a stolen life. Grief quickly hardened into a diamond-sharp resolve. Mara would not let another family suffer this fate. She would not let another soul be reaped by this silent terror. She took up her father's old hunting blade, its edge still keen, and waited for the next blood moon. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about liberation. She would hunt the hunter. The cycle continued. Another blood moon, another appearance. But this time, Mara was ready. She didn't wait in the square. She hid in the shadows of the ancient woods that bordered the village, the very woods from which the Reaper always emerged. She watched it drift past, a phantom on a grim errand, and then she followed. Her pursuit was an exercise in futility. The Reaper left no tracks. It made no sound. It was like chasing a wisp of smoke through a dense fog. The mist grew thicker, colder, wrapping around her, trying to turn her back. But the image of Ilara's terrified face fueled her every step. For what felt like hours, she trailed the silent figure, deeper and deeper into the forest's forgotten heart. Finally, they reached a clearing, bathed in the moon's unholy red light. At its center was a clearing unlike any she'd ever seen. It was a garden, not of flowers, but of graves. Hundreds of simple, unmarked stones stood in silent rows. The Reaper stopped and turned, as if it had known she was there all along. With a battle cry caught in her throat, a mix of rage and sorrow, Mara charged. She swung her blade with all her might, aiming for the heart of the hooded figure. But her sword met no resistance. It passed straight through the Reaper's form as if it were nothing more than shadow and mist. She stumbled off balance, her attack utterly useless. She spun around, blade ready, expecting a counterattack, a fight for her life. But the figure simply stood there. A low whisper, like the rustling of dead leaves, echoed in her mind, though its mouth never moved. "You misunderstand," the voice said. It wasn't menacing or cruel, it was filled with an ancient, weary sadness. Mara froze. "Misunderstand? You took my sister, you've taken so many," she yelled, her voice cracking. The Reaper slowly raised a hand, not in threat, but in a gesture of peace. "I do not take," it whispered. "I guide. The bloom is not a punishment, it is an offer of release." Confused and still wary, Mara watched as the Reaper extended its hand toward her. But this time, it wasn't holding a new rose. It was holding the very rose that had been left on Ilara's nightstand. Its petals were no longer just red. They swirled with faint, ethereal images. Hesitantly, Mara looked closer. Within the delicate folds of the petals, she saw faces. Not screaming or tormented, but serene. She saw the old baker who had vanished a decade ago, a gentle smile on his lips. She saw the young boy who had disappeared last spring, his eyes peaceful. And then she saw Ilara. Her sister's face was there, shimmering in the heart of the bloom. And she was smiling, a genuine happy smile, free from the fear that had haunted her final moments. "The forgotten village is bound by a sorrow that taints the soul," the Reaper explained. "Life here is a slow decay, a withering on the vine. The Red Bloom Pact is mercy. It offers an escape to a place of peace, a final rest before the bitterness of this land consumes them entirely." The truth crashed down on Mara with the force of a tidal wave. This creature wasn't a monster, it was a guide. A ferryman for souls trapped in a dying world. The ones who vanished weren't destroyed, they were freed. The village's fear had twisted an act of compassion into a curse. The Reaper gently placed the rose into Mara's hand. As her fingers touched it, the images grew clearer. She could almost feel the warmth of Ilara's smile, the peace radiating from the countless faces within the petals. The weight of her quest, her anger, her grief, suddenly felt immense and misplaced. Then, as the reality of it all settled in her soul, the rose in her hand began to change. The vibrant red bled away, turning to ash and charcoal. The petals withered, curling in on themselves, and the faces faded. The rose turned completely black, crumbling into dust that slipped through her fingers. Mara dropped to her knees in the Garden of Graves, her sword clattering beside her. The tears she had refused to shed now streamed down her face. They weren't tears of anger anymore, but of a profound, earth-shattering understanding. She had been fighting the wrong battle. The enemy wasn't the Reaper. It was the despair of the village itself. The Reaper stood over her for a long moment, a silent sentinel in the blood-red moonlight. It gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, then turned and faded back into the mists, its eternal duty awaiting. Mara was left alone, kneeling in a garden of peaceful souls, the black dust of the bloom staining her hands. She finally understood the Red Bloom Pact, and the knowledge was a burden heavier than any sword. The curse wasn't the Reaper's visit, it was the life they were all so desperately trying to save. What do you think Mara did next? Did she return to the village with this devastating truth, or did she find her own way to accept the pact? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this story, Lucienne had loved her once, before the relentless grip of disease stole her breath, leaving him in a world drained of color and warmth. Her laughter, once the melody of his days, became a haunting echo in the silent halls of his memory. Every night, as the moon cast long, sorrowful shadows across his room, he would fall to his knees, his hands clasped in desperate prayer. Not to any god he knew, but to the vast, indifferent emptiness, begging for just one more glimpse of her face, one more moment in her presence. He prayed to see her again, a wish whispered into the void, a testament to a love that refused to die even when she had. The nights blurred into a monotonous cycle of grief and longing. The world outside his window continued its relentless spin, but Lucien's world had stopped the day she'd left it. He became a ghost in his own home, wandering through rooms that still held the faint scent of her perfume, his fingers tracing the outlines of objects she had touched. Friends tried to reach him, their voices muffled by the thick fog of his sorrow. He wanted none of their comfort, none of their pity. He wanted only her. His heart, a hollowed-out cavern, ached with a single, all-consuming desire to see her just once more. Then, one evening, the heavens seemed to mirror the tempest in his soul. A ferocious storm raged outside, rain lashing against the window panes like angry tears, and thunder rattling the very foundations of his house. The fire in the hearth crackled and spat, casting dancing, demonic shadows on the walls. It was on this night, a night fit for madness and miracles, that his prayers were finally answered. He was staring into the flames, lost in a reverie of happier times, when a sudden chill colder than the winter wind snaked through the room, extinguishing the fire's warmth. He looked up, his heart lurching in his chest. There, standing by the now dying fire, was a figure. It was tall and draped in a cloak, the color of a starless midnight, the fabric seeming to drink the light from the room. The hood was pulled low, shrouding its face in impenetrable darkness. Lucien's breath caught in his throat. He wasn't afraid, he was transfixed. As his eyes adjusted, he saw the glint of bone beneath the shadows, the unmistakable structure of a skull where a face should be. A skeletal hand emerged from the cloak's folds, slender and unnervingly graceful. In its bony grasp, it held a single red rose. But this was no ordinary flower. It pulsed with a soft, internal light, a deep crimson glow that pushed back against the encroaching darkness. It was a beacon in the gloom, beautiful and terrible all at once. The figure remained silent, a statue of finality, the only movement the faint, rhythmic glow of the rose. Lucien felt a strange sense of recognition, a familiarity that defied logic. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, who this visitor was. It was death itself, the very entity that had stolen his love from him. A voice, not of sound, but of thought, echoed in the cavern of Lucien's mind. It was ancient and dry, like dust settling in a long-forgotten tomb. "You called," it resonated, each word a tolling bell of fate. "Every night you have begged for her." The figure shifted slightly, and the fire flickered back to life for a moment, illuminating the hollow sockets where eyes should have been. In that darkness, Lucien saw an eternity of waiting. "Your wish is granted. She waits for you." Death's gaze, or the lack thereof, was fixed on him, an unblinking, absolute stare. "She waits beyond the veil." Lucien's eyes were locked on the glowing rose. It was the most vibrant thing he had seen since her passing, a splash of life in his monochrome existence. He understood the offer. He understood the price. There was no hesitation, no second thought. All the pain, all the loneliness, all the empty nights culminated in this single defining moment. This was his salvation. This was the door he had been pounding on for so long. The figure extended its hand, offering the flower. "Now she waits beyond," the voice repeated, a final solemn promise. Without a word, Lucien pushed himself from his chair and walked towards the cloaked figure. His steps were steady, his purpose clear. He reached out, his trembling hand moving towards the rose. He ignored the thorns, sharp as daggers, that lined its stem. He ignored the searing pain as they sliced into the soft flesh of his palm, warm blood welling up and trickling down his wrist, a stark living red against his pale skin. The pain was nothing. It was a distant, insignificant sensation compared to the agony that had been his constant companion. He grasped the rose tightly, his blood mingling with its ethereal light. "Take me to her," he whispered, his voice raspy from disuse, but firm with conviction. A change occurred in the figure before him. The rigid lines of its jaw seemed to shift, the skull tilting in a gesture that could only be described as a smile. It was a grim, knowing, and perhaps even compassionate expression. The silent understanding passed between them. A man who loved so deeply he would embrace the end and the end itself, acknowledging that love. As Lucien's fingers tightened around the stem, a sudden weakness washed over him. The room began to spin, the edges of his vision blurring into a vortex of shadow and light. The last thing he felt was the strange, cold texture of the rose against his skin as he fell, lifeless, to the floor. As his body lay still, a profound silence descended upon the room once more. The storm outside quieted to a gentle patter. The cloaked figure of death stood over him for a long moment, a silent sentinel at the threshold of eternity. Then, slowly, the crimson rose in Lucien's hand began to change. Its petals, once tightly furled, started to tremble and unfurl, fluttering apart with a soft, rustling sound. They drifted gently to the floor around him, each one a whisper of velvet and light, and on the delicate, intricate veins of every single petal, etched as if by a master artist, was her name, a final, beautiful testament written in the very heart of the flower that had guided him home. Detective Rowan thought he'd seen it all. 20 years on the force, from the grimiest back alleys to the most opulent penthouses, had etched a roadmap of human depravity onto his soul. But this was different. This was art. Twisted, macabre, but undeniably beautiful. The first victim was a stockbroker, a man whose life was a spreadsheet of calculated risks. He was found in his high-tech office, slumped over a mahogany desk, a single, perfect red rose resting on his chest. Its petals were impossibly fresh, kissed with dew, as if plucked from a garden just moments before. No signs of forced entry, no struggle, just a man who had seemingly expired mid-thought, gifted a final silent token. 2 days later, it was a librarian. A quiet woman who lived among stories, now a story herself. She was found in the rare book section, surrounded by the ghosts of 1,000 authors, the same perfect red rose placed over her heart. The press, with their typical flair for the dramatic, had already coined a name: the Rose Killer. The city was on edge. A killer who left no trace but a flower was a phantom, a whisper in the dark that was becoming a scream. Rowan stood over the librarian, the scent of old paper and fresh bloom mingling in the air. He felt a chill that had nothing to do with the library's overzealous air conditioning. This wasn't about money or revenge. It was a ritual, a sermon delivered in blood and petals. The third victim, a week later, was a street artist known for his vibrant, hopeful murals. He was found in his studio, splattered not with paint, but with the absence of life. And there it was again, the crimson calling card. Each victim was a world apart. Finance, literature, art. What was the thread connecting them? Rowan and his team ran the gamut of possibilities. Secret societies, a long-lost debt, a shared, forgotten past. Every lead was a dead end, every database search a blank screen. The killer was a ghost, leaving only a floral signature that mocked their efforts. The roses themselves were a mystery. Forensic botanists were stumped. They were a common variety, but the level of preservation was uncanny. They never wilted. Rowan spent his nights buried in case files, the faces of the victims staring back at him from photographs. He traced their lives, their habits, their connections, looking for the invisible string that tied them all together. The stockbroker, he learned, had recently started donating millions to charity, trying to buy back his soul. The librarian had been secretly writing a novel, a story about a man who could talk to the dead. The artist's final unfinished piece was a portrait of a skeleton, not menacing but serene, holding a single blooming flower. They were all seekers. They were all on the precipice of some profound change, some personal truth. Was that the connection? A spiritual awakening cut short? The pressure was immense. The mayor called every hour. The media camped outside the precinct. Rowan felt like he was drowning in a sea of unanswered questions. He'd started seeing roses everywhere, in floral shop windows, on garden fences, in the patterns of strangers' dresses. The city's most beautiful flower had become an omen. One night, exhausted and running on stale coffee and sheer willpower, Rowan was working late in his office, the city lights painting streaks across his window. The room was a mess of files, maps, and photos, the chaotic landscape of his obsession. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his tired eyes. That's when he smelled it. Not the stale aroma of old paper and precinct coffee, but something fresh, floral, and deeply unsettling. His eyes snapped open. There on the corner of his desk, placed as delicately as it had been on the victims' chests, was a perfect red rose. The dew on its petals glistened under his desk lamp. His heart hammered against his ribs. He hadn't heard the door. No one had come in. His office was supposed to be secure. Tucked under the stem was a small, elegant card. His hand trembled as he reached for it. The handwriting was a graceful, flowing script, a stark contrast to the grim message it carried. Just 2 words, etched in black ink. "You're next." A cold wave washed over him, colder than any winter night. The air in the room grew heavy, thick, and ancient. He felt a presence behind him, a stillness that absorbed all sound, all light. Slowly, fighting every instinct that screamed at him to run, he turned his chair, and there it was, not a man, not a person in a mask, but a figure cloaked in shadow, a hood obscuring any hint of a face. It was tall, silent, and seemed to bend the very light around it. It wasn't holding a weapon. It wasn't making a threat. It was simply there, the Reaper. The thought came to Rowan unbidden, a primal recognition from the deepest part of his mind. This wasn't a human killer. This was something else entirely. Why? Rowan's voice was a ragged whisper, barely audible in the crushing silence. Why me? The hooded figure didn't answer with words at first. Instead, it raised a hand that seemed woven from the same deep shadow as its cloak. In it, another perfect red rose. It extended the flower towards him. Then, a voice spoke, not through the air, but directly into Rowan's mind. It was a voice of rustling leaves and shifting sands, a voice as old as time itself. "Because you seek truth," it said. The words resonated in his bones, and truth is the final gift. The figure wasn't a killer. It was a guide. The victims weren't murdered. They were chosen. They had reached the end of their search, the moment of profound understanding they had all been striving for. And this being, this collector of souls, had simply come to escort them to the next stage, leaving a token of their completed journey. The rose. The scent of the flower on his desk grew stronger, filling his lungs. A sweet, heady perfume that was both beautiful and terrifying. Rowan looked from the rose in the Reaper's hand to the one on his desk. His own search for truth had led him here, to this final, ultimate answer. The darkness at the edge of his vision began to creep in, soft and welcoming. He didn't feel fear anymore, only a profound sense of acceptance. As the world faded to black, his last conscious thought was of the rose, its crimson petals a final, beautiful truth. And somewhere, in a garden unseen, another perfect rose began to bloom, waiting for the next seeker to complete their journey.